Welcome to the Boxing Source Midweek Report, where we tackle the latest topics in the sport of boxing here up to this point every single Wednesday. Time to start the show. Mic check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. What's going on here? Again, I'm gonna try to figure out what in the wild world of sports is going on with this whole thing with the apparatus here. But just give me 1 second. We should be here. We should be live and everything like that. What's good with everyone here? Joining in for the Boxing Source Midweek Report. We got something here going on. Tried to add a new thing here. It should be having a channel on Kick. I think we do have kick.com as well. So we're live on Rumble, we're live on YouTube, and we're live on Kick. So we got, all of those ways that you will be able to check out the Boxing Source. You know what I mean? But we got a few things here that, we're going to run through here. You got the whole thing, Christmas Eve, all that type of stuff here in the middle of the holiday season here, as we are just about 1 week away from the end of this year they call 2025. So we got a few things here that we're going to go through. Of course, we do have fights that is scheduled for Saturday. So we're going to, tackle that here in this edition of the Boxing Source Midweek Report. And, we're going to still, talk a few things about what was going on with the fights that took place on Friday night, last Friday. All right. So we're going to be doing that. And also, we do have the Boxing Source Award show that will be on Sunday night. We're going to have multiple categories there for the Boxing Source Awards there for 2025. And we got different categories here, and we're going to name the nominees for each of those categories that we're going to tackle here real quick. Once again, big ups for everyone that's able to listen live here on the Midweek Report. And if you can, just check out our content here, whether it's through YouTube or Rumble. Kick, of course, you can't really have much there with that, but those that are able to check us out on Kick, there, you know how it is. You pitch in for a sub and that type of thing. You'll be able to chat on Kick. So just look up the Boxing Source on Kick, and you'll be able to see us there. You know what I mean? So that that's what we got going on here in this edition of the Boxing Source Midweek Report. So, with that being said, let's get into it. We got, of course, here, we ain't even a week away, a week removed from what happened over in Miami, Florida, where you had Anthony Joshua knocking out Jake Paul there, and pretty much like sending a message there, as they say, that you can't play boxing there on that front. So we kind of looked into a few things here when it came to the numbers and everything like that. So they did kind of post the thing there for viewership in reference to that, and they said that up to 33 million. Let me see here if I'm able to share this here, because I have the post on there, and it said there from Netflix that 33 million global viewers watched on Netflix there for the fight between Jake Paul and Anthony Joshua there. And they said, up to an estimated number of 15 million people watched live for Alicia Baumgartner and Layla Badouin, which was, as I said, a co-feature bout. But, with that being said, you had 33 million people that were able to watch this here worldwide. You compare that to what happened earlier this year when you had Canelo Alvarez and Terrence Crawford for the undisputed super middleweight championship. If I'm not mistaken, that had about 41 million viewers there for that particular bout. Now, a number of people could make a comparative thing here as far as Jake Paul and who he could have faced, where it was Tank Davis, or something there where you have it to where Anthony Joshua, if that was big enough to get that amount of attention, particularly in a short amount of time. Because remember, the original scheduled bout between Jake Paul and Tank Davis was supposed to take place on November 14th, and then here we are, like about a month later, or 4 or 5 weeks later, they were able to have this fight, a sanctioned bout in the heavyweight division, between Jake Paul and Anthony Joshua, and they were able to generate 33 million live viewers there on Netflix. I wanted to also see if I could try to get the Netflix numbers, for that particular thing. I will see here. All right, so they were able to do that. I'm gonna see if I can get that real quick because it did have it here. I'm gonna try to see if I could show it because they were able to pull it up as far as like the shows there in the United States. It did show that Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua there was number one in the United States here. So wanted to see that. All right, yeah, it should be able to be pulled up right here. It says there Jake versus Joshua at number one. There, of course, they had the thing there with Emily in Paris. I guess they had season 5 shows there. The Sean Combs documentary. You got Dave Chappelle, the Unstoppable joint. Well, hey, that's gonna be something I'm gonna be watching here real soon, right? But there, you had the whole thing in reference to Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua. Of course, that was like weeks in the top 10. That's first week there, so they're able to generate those numbers in order to get that 33 million worldwide, and then be the number one show for Netflix in the U.S. So that shows the amount of viewership and the amount of attention that they got for that particular bout, right? Now, with that being said, what does this mean on either side? For Anthony Joshua, given the whole thing as far as like the moment, the knockout, all the stuff that's happened, immediately after that, or a couple days after that, now you have attention towards Anthony Joshua and what he could be doing going into 2026. We talked about it there as far as like him potentially facing Tyson Fury in the heavyweight division, and making a super fight of sorts there over in the United Kingdom. As far as like him, potentially going for a world championship, not sure that's going to happen. You do have Alexander Usyk as unified champion, and you do have, of course, Fabio Wardley with the WBO belt, which Alexander Usyk ended up relinquishing, right? So that is pretty much like the situation there. Now, I don't know if they have it to a point where Joshua could face someone like a face of Fabio Wardley before facing Tyson Fury, and having, if he defeats Wardley, it will be Joshua versus Fury for the WBO belt. But outside of that, I don't really think that that is much of a concern, because now you got, of course, Joshua getting the attention that he has, not just in the UK, but now internationally, that makes him like a figure that could be viewed as, I don't know, like one of the star attractions, not just in the sport of boxing, but in sports in general. So you almost could say that they're trying to build him up to be the level of popularity that you do have, not with like a Canelo Alvarez, but something like maybe even a Floyd Mayweather. You know what I mean? So you can see Anthony Joshua being like one of the biggest sports figures in the world. But we have to see, given what happened here in this bout against Jake Paul, we'll see if he gets that amount of attention to where it would be like anything he does would be able to, generate a whole lot of interest on that front. Now, from what is it, like media marketing or social media standpoint, we have to see like where he stands as of right now. You do have it to the point where he has 18 million followers on Instagram and stuff like that. So that's what you got here in this current situation when it comes to the popularity level there for Anthony Joshua here at this point. Let's see if it continues to grow, or if they have something where they market him to kind of get more interest or get more eyes or get more attention until the next fight that he has takes place. So that's on the side of Anthony Joshua. Now for the side of Jake Paul, okay, given that he got knocked out and given that he had a broken jaw, the question is, could this mean that it could be a wrap for Jake Paul in the boxing world, or as far as like boxing? I don't know. I don't know because he would be out for a good little minute. Of course, with a broken jaw, and that it does take a lot of time for to kind of like get back from that as far as like health is concerned. But then the other thing is that how would you be able to prepare yourself for any type of fight in any capacity? Um, you know, After suffering a loss like that. That's the thing there on one front, right? The other thing is, given that you had the situation with Jake Paul and Anthony Joshua, there being a sanctioned bout, right? Heavyweight fight, sanctioned bout in Florida, right? And it's something where, Jake Paul was basically a cruiserweight. He had been competing in any form or fashion in the cruiserweight division. Of course, people know about him having a ranking in the World Boxing Association in the cruiserweight division, but then having this 8 round bout against Anthony Joshua, as they say, a one off in the heavyweight division. Now, in any other capacity, as far as like given the level of competition or whatever it is, maybe they wouldn't be, sanctioning this type of bout. This isn't the I don't know, the 1960s or the 1970s or something like that, where you have guys that like a Muhammad Ali or something like a Joe Frazier or a George Foreman, facing someone that could be like having 4 or 5 professional fights on record, and then they sanction about to be a 6 rounder or 8 round bout. It's not like that. It's not like you have Julio Cesar Chavez, going into Mexico and he'll be like 93-0, face somebody in Mexico that's like, I don't know, 3-10 or 3-7. You know what I mean? It's not like that. But given this current time and this current juncture, they kind of make things to the point where you don't get something like this happening because the state athletic commissions usually wouldn't approve of something like that, for safety issues or things like that. So, you know, for the Florida State Athletic Commission to, kind of like have this go through, I mean, it's on, that's on their part. But, hey, in boxing, as they say, you don't play boxing. And, with that being said, hey, Joshua giving Jake Paul a broken jaw, that's one thing. But as they say, it could have been a lot worse. Of course, in my conversation there with Coach Bob Santos yesterday, we pretty much said the same thing. Like, it could have been a whole lot worse. It could have been something where he could have, Joshua could have just landed flush, and I'm talking about flush, like right, in the middle, like not something like this. I'm talking about something like straight ahead. You know what I mean? Something like how you had either Joshua versus Francis Ngannou, or what we've seen earlier this month with Frank Martin and Francis Barthélemy. That was, of course, that was like one of the most hideous knockouts that we've seen this year. Of course, that's going to be a candidate for one of the categories we have for the Boxing Source Award Show, which I'll talk about here a little bit later on. But with that being said, this whole thing with Jake Paul, now it's unknown if he is going to continue his boxing career. I do think that he will be on the shelf for a good little minute. And if he does return to the ring, if Jake Paul returns to the ring, I don't know, like, in what capacity he would be able to do it as. I don't know if it would be in actual pro sanctioned bouts or if it would be exhibitions or anything like that. Like, if he didn't have this particular bout against Anthony Joshua and just went through the rest of the year only having that one fight against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., then maybe you could have had, more of those possibilities of Jake Paul fighting, well-known guys. Because, of course, you had the whole thing with Tank, but even before that, he wanted to get in a fight with Canelo Alvarez this year. But since you had the whole thing with Undisputed in the super middleweight division, Jake Paul wasn't able to get that. Now, of course, with the result of what happened on September, you could have had that possibility of Jake Paul versus Terrence Crawford. Yeah, it seems far fetched, but yeah, that was one of the things there that you did have as a possibility. You know what I mean? So that's a few of those things that could have been in play. It could have been in play out there, for Jake Paul, right? But this time around, no. Given that you do have Jake Paul now with that broken jaw, and now has to nurse that. You know what I mean? Um, it's going to be something to kind of like see what he's going to be able to do. You know what I mean? So let's see here with what's going on. Oh, okay, yeah, I see what's going on with this. So I thought I had this thing on kick, but it doesn't look like it's properly connected on that front. So I'm gonna try something a little bit different on that range when it comes to being live on kick. But I just had it as a test run here on the midweek report. All right. So that's what we have as far as like what's in store for both Anthony Joshua and Jake Paul in 2026. But at least that's what I'm kind of like saying will be going down, right? Now you're going to what's in up here for Saturday. You do have this thing with Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Ring Five, Night of the Samurai is what they're talking, or is what they're bringing this up as. So we do have as they say about 5 fights on the schedule. Um, I think there's been a little bit of things that's kind of worked out there. And, as far as like that fight card is concerned, we were supposed to have multiple world title bouts, but there's one that didn't necessarily happen here. I have to see if I can make sure that I get this thing here because of course you do have the thing there with Naoya Inoue defending his undisputed titles there in the super bantamweight division, right? But we were supposed to have something else on slate for it, so I'm going to see here because I know it was. I think it was Jazza Dickens, right? That was supposed to be fighting on this card and defending his title, right? But that ended up being I guess a fell off year because you had Hayato Sutsumi. He was supposed to fight Hayato Sutsumi there, but Sutsumi suffered a cut during camp, so that particular fight is postponed. You know what I mean? So with that being said, let's go through what we have for the fight card. So I'm going to see here if I'm pull that up here real quick. And this is what it is. You got Naoya Inoue versus David Picasso for the Undisputed Super Bantamweight Championships. You got Junto Nakatani versus Sebastian Hernandez Reyes there. You got Willibaldo Garcia versus Kenshiro Taraji for the IBF Super Flyweight titles. You got Reto Susumi there against Leobardo Quintana, and you got Tiger Managa going up against Erickson Garcia. I don't know. That might be a good little matchup there. It just depends on what we get with Erickson Garcia. But like I said, you would have had Jazza Dickens there in the ring against Hayato Susumi, but Hayato Susumi suffered a cut and is out for this fight card. You know what I mean? So just going through these fights here. First, of course, with Naoya Inoue versus David Picasso, right? He got Inoue defending his undisputed titles here once again. He's been fairly active there within this year. We've had what I would say four. Now we said four. Let me say four because I was talking about it beforehand on Sunday, and I thought it was basically two bouts, mainly because I forgot about the first one he had in January, and I forgot about the one that he had against MJ Akhmadaliev. That was that hours after Canelo versus Crawford. We had the whole thing with Inoue versus Ramon Cardenas in May over in Las Vegas, and now you got this. So that would be four fights for Naoya Inoue here this year. So it shows that he's been very active here this year, right? And man, they had this whole thing as far as like the odds. They got Inoue as high as a 30-1 favorite in comparison to Alan Picasso or David Picasso, Romero, whatever name they got for him. They got him at least like a 10-1 underdog. 10-1, as high as like 14-1 underdog for Alan Picasso. So in comparison to Anayo in a way, they ain't really saying that he got much of a shot. Just being honest there, doesn't look like he got much of a shot there to be able to score the win over Naoya in a way. But I mean, hey, we've had upsets this year. We've had upsets in years past. Doesn't mean it can't happen again. You know what I mean? So with that being said, we'll have to see what uh what the status is there for Naoya Inoue, and if he's able to properly get the win here against, I don't know, David Allen Picasso, Romero. I don't know, it's like five different names or something like that when it comes to him, right? So, with that being said, there you got that as one of the bouts. Of course, it's a main event. It's supposed to be what, live on the Zone pay per view, whatever it is, and over in the East Coast, that means it's going to happen at like 7 a.m. or 7:30 a.m. or something like that. I have to get the things there because it was showing it on social media, right? So I'm gonna see if I could you'll post that up or show that here in a moment. But with that being said, let me you'll go ahead and get this thing here for the next bout, right? The next bout that we got on there is the thing with, excuse me, with Junto Nakatani, right? Against Sebastian Hernandez Reyes. Yeah, you got Junto Nakatani, been there in the bantamweight division, been a world champion at the bantamweight division. Now, going up to super bantamweight against undefeated Sebastian Hernandez, and folks like saying, "Hey, this is where it could be if you have Inoue winning and you have Junto Nakatani winning, then those two will be facing each other in May of next year. All right. So let me see here. I got this thing as far as like what the times are going to be. I was able to uh, put this thing here for the zone, showing there for fight night or fight times confirmed there. So it says ring walk for Nakatani versus Sebastian Hernandez. There it's showing as 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Once again, 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time, right? Showing there also the main event ring walk times. Therefore, it is going to be 7:45 a.m. Eastern Time. It's going to be 4:45 a.m. Pacific. So that tells you that, oh man, if you want to catch Naoya anyway and you're over here in the States, yeah, you're going to have to get up a little bit early in the morning. But I mean, it's not, quite like how you had the fights over in Japan when it comes to Naoya anyway, or, Junto Nakatani, or, like I said, with Tenshin Nasukawa or something like that, where you would have to see them at like what, 4 a.m. Eastern Time or 5 a.m. Eastern Time. Now they're gonna have this thing here with Naoya Inoue and David Picasso. They're at 7:45 a.m. Eastern Time is when they're planning to have the ring walk for that undisputed super bantamweight championship fight. All right. So you got that at 7:45, and like I was saying there, for the co-feature bout, there they have Nagatani versus Hernandez. The ring walks there for approximately 6:30 a.m. Eastern time. Right. So we're gonna see if you do have either of those guys either scoring the win or end up being upset. Now I talked about the whole thing with the odds for Naoya Inoue versus David Allen Picasso, right? But you also you'll have the thing there with Junto Nakatani and Sebastian Hernandez there, and they got Nakatani as high as like a 18-1 favorite. Looks like, or something maybe like a 20-1 favorite over Sebastian Hernandez. So even with it being the first bout that John Katani is having there in the super bantamweight division, they're highly, favoring him to win that bout. Should be Tego there in the building, man. What's going on with you? Checking in here on the Boxing Source Midweek Report here. Yes, it is, December 24th. I'd say Christmas Eve and things like that. But, we wanted to chop it up here a little bit, go through a few topics here for, the sport of boxing here, while we get wind down here for the year 2025, right? So that's pretty much what we have as far as like that fight card. As I said, one of those world title bouts did end up getting scrapped here, due to one of the fighters suffering a cut in camp. So Jazza Dickens, who was basically named the world champion there at 130 pounds, WBA world champion, due to, of course, Lamar Rose Jr. moving up from 130 and having to fight against St. Davis at 135 and Isak Cruz at 140. Now you got Jazza Diggins as the full champ. Okay. So, that's what, the whole situation is for ring six or ring five, ring five, because ring six is going to take place on January 31st in New York City, right? Of course, you had that headlining bout there with Teofimo Lopez versus Shakur Stevenson, right? So you're going to have that bout, right? And what else is going to be taking place there? You're supposed to have the IBF super lightweight title on the line on that card as well, with Richard Hitchens going up against Jermaine Ortiz. So that's going to be, another one of those bouts there that's on that card. They're supposed to have the WBC lightweight, WBC featherweight title on the line there as well, right? Because you're going to have Bruce Carrington on there, of course, with the whole thing with Oshaki Foster and Stephen Fulton, with Stephen Fulton, kind of like being overweight for that bout, but he was the featherweight champion, WBC featherweight champion. Now, he ends up losing to Oshaki Foster, and now he just basically lost the belt there. So it should be Bruce Carrington versus Carlos Castro there on that fight card as well. You know what I mean? So that's the schedule there that we got at least so far for that fight card on January 31st for Ring 6. All right. So that being said, that's kind of like quick rundown of Ring 5. For those that want to see Naoya Inoue in action, those who want to see Junto Nakatani in action. Hey, if you're in the East Coast, you're gonna have to wake up at about like 6 a.m. But at least it won't be like those in the West Coast where you're gonna have to be up at around 3 a.m., 3:30 a.m. in order to check out Junto Nakatani and Naoya Inoue on Saturday, right? So we do have that, and then what else do we have in store here? That kind of like closes out the year for 2025, and so that means you do have folks that may have the whole thing with awards and stuff like that. Different media entities and publications and all that type of stuff. They have their whole thing with their awards, right? Some have had theirs already. Some are yet to have theirs. But you know what? The Boxing Source will have their award show, right? And that will be taking place on Sunday. All right. So on Sunday for the Boxing Source podcast live, we will have the 2025 Boxing Source Award Show, right? And we got a number of categories that's going to be out there for this one, right? All right. So, with that being said, all right, this is what we got as far as like the categories, right? We do have Prospect of the Year, Trainer of the Year, Upset of the Year, Round of the Year, Knockout of the Year, Failure of the Year, the Event of the Year, Comeback Fighter of the Year, Women's Fight of the Year, Women's Fighter of the Year, men's fighter of the year and men's fighter of the year. All right. So that being said, we're just gonna do the quick rundown here. Let me see if I'm able to modify a few things here. So this is what we got. All right. So I'm gonna see if I could do a little bit of copying and pasting here. So just bear me for 1 second. I'm gonna see here if I could try something here with this, right? So let's do this. I'm gonna see if I can post this thing here. Not necessarily through that way. All right. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm gonna just make it so y'all be able to see it. All right, and then I got this thing here, right? So let's do this. Let's do put it down this way, and we're gonna run it. Jeez, I ain't want to do all that. Hold y'all. Hold on. All right, there it is. There it is. All right. So what we got here is we got first one is prospect of the year. Okay. First one we got is prospect of the year. So these are the nominees that we have here currently for prospect of the year. First one that we got here, if you're able to pull this up, is Carmel Moulton. All right. So we got Carmel Moulton as one of the nominees there for prospect of the year. All right. Next one that we have is Dwight Flemings Jr. So that's another one that we have for candidate of prospect of the year. The other one that we have is Derek Davis. So we do have Derek Davis as another uh, candidate for prospect of the year for 2025. All right, here's going to be the other one that we have here for the prospect of the year, and he is a heavyweight there, and that is Teramoana. Yeah. Say that about 5 times fast. Teramoana. Right, and we got him there in the heavyweight division, and we also have here on as a potential candidate for prospect of the year is Omari Jones. All right, so those are the candidates that we have there for prospect of the year. All right, so it's kind of like a good amount of fighters that we'll be able to kind of like choose from. One of the things is that I don't necessarily have fighters that may have like 9 or 10 fights or like 12 to 13 fights, but they're kind of like a contender or they're like right on the brink of fighting for a world title or something like that. So somebody like an Andy Cruz, nah, like an Andy Cruz, you're not gonna have someone like him on this thing here for prospect of the year. So that's not happening, right? The other thing is what else I was gonna say that if you have someone where you're like around the rankings there, then nah, you're not necessarily going to be a candidate there for prospect of the year. So, you do have like some other folks that may have like someone like a Moses Atama on there as a candidate for prospect of the year, but Moses Atama is like right there at what number 1 in the WBO rankings in the heavyweight division. So, are you necessarily gonna call him a prospect on that sense? Mm, you know what? Probably not. You know what I mean? So I don't necessarily, like have him on there as a candidate for like a prospect of the year. Um, so I mean, some other people might have him on there, but here on my instance, I'm not necessarily going to do that. All right. So you do have that, right? Okay. So the next thing that we have here for it is we're going to have the thing for let me show that here. Trainer of the year. Yep. Trainer of the year. All right. So we got the thing there for trainer of the year. This one This one might be a little bit difficult. Might be a little bit difficult here. So, we're gonna see here what we gonna have here for trainer of the year. All right, first candidate here we got Bob Santos. Bob Santos does have a number of fighters that he's uh, been in the corner of here over the course of 2025, or scored a few good wins there over the course of of 2025, and had other notable fights that did take place here. So you do have Bob Santos as one of the candidates there for trainer of the year. Now, of course, he's been noted as having trainer of the year award in other publications here in the past. So we're going to see if he is basically in the running for trainer of the year this year. Next candidate here is Robert Garcia. Robert Garcia has also been another one that has had some notoriety being there for trainer of the year elsewhere. Man, we've had a good number of fighters that have done real good things this year. Of course, people bring up the thing there for Virgil Ortiz Jr., right? But we had a few other instances where you do have Robert Garcia being noted as being in the corner for a few of these key fighters there, right? So you do have that. All right. Next up on here is Bozy Ennis. Of course, you got Bozy Ennis that is the father and trainer of Jerome Boots Ennis, who is there in the 154-pound division. Had been a unified champion in 147 pounds. So you do have him. You got, of course, like Andy Cruz. You did have Stephen Fulton, and a multitude of other fighters there that is under the tutelage of Bozy Ennis. So that's another one, right? Next candidate here is Ronnie Shields. You do have a number of fighters excuse me, that you're under Ronnie Shields, that was able to do a few things here in 2025. You do have like Otto Wallin is there, under the tutelage of Ronnie Shields. You have the thing there with Justin Paldo, as a couple of examples. Excuse me. And he's got a few things that's coming up here for 2026, but you also have, of course, the young heavyweight there from Houston that's there with Joshua Edwards. It's been very active in 2025, and he is there in the camp with Ronnie Shields over in the Houston area. So here's another candidate, and next one here is Andy Lee. You've seen Andy Lee in a few of these key bouts in 2025. He's had like key wins there. We know about one of them that happened in New York City. There, in the super middleweight division, right? So you do have Andy Lee there as one of those candidates there for Trainer of the Year. All right. So that's what we got there for Trainer of the Year. That may be a tough one. That may be a tough one. That may be a tough one. All right, because we got five candidates. I would say five strong candidates there in reference to that. So we're gonna see here, like I said, on Sunday is when we're gonna have the Boxing Source Award show. So that will be the thing there where you're gonna see what's gonna win there for Trainer of the Year. But the next one here is upset of the year. Yeah, yeah, yep. You do have a number of candidates here for upset of the year. Well, I mean, I would say, uh, is it like a number of candidates? Nah, I would kind of like say it would be like a few here that we're gonna be able to bring up, right? Um, and one of them is Jorge Garcia Perez versus Charles Conwell. This was, on a Golden Boy card, whatnot. You did have Charles Conwell that was, at the time, contending to be in position for a world title. There was talk that he could have been fighting for the IBF title there at 154 pounds, but that didn't necessarily work out. And so this fight here was a final eliminator of sorts for the WBO or whatever it was. Well, it was like an eliminator of sorts at the time for the WBO title, right? But that was when you had Sebastian Fundora holding the title, and you had Xander Zayas as a mandatory challenger, right? But with Fundora having a fight with Tim Zhu in a rematch or whatever it was, and not face Xander Zayas, what that meant was you had Xander Zayas fighting the winner of this for the vacant WBO title at the time. And Charles Conwell, was highly favored to, kind of like win this one, but didn't necessarily go that way. Jorge Garcia Perez was able to, outwork him and get the decision win to put him in position to fight for the WBO title against Xander Zayas, and that was at the theater at Madison Square Garden. And as we know, Xander Zayas ended up winning that particular bout and became the WBO champion at 154 pounds. All right, so that is one of the candidates there. All right, the next one we got Rolando Rolly Romero versus Ryan Garcia. Of course, this was in May. This one, was kind of the thing where it was a headlining bout over there in Times Square. It was, I guess, something where they tried to have it to the point where Ryan Garcia would be able to get a win and either have it to the point where he faced the WBA full champion there at welterweight, or it could have been to the point where you have a rematch with Devin Haney. Devin Haney won his bout earlier on the card there against Jose Carlos Ramirez. And so it was like, okay, everything kind of like lined up. But Rolly Romero got himself an early knockdown, had nullified the offense, completely nullified the offensive source there of Brian Garcia over the course of those 12 rounds, and was able to score the decision victory to become the at the time the interim champion there, and then ended up being elevated to full champion later in the year. So you have Rolly Romero over Ryan Garcia as one of the candidates for upset of the year. Now the next one here, this one I think kind of like surprised a good number of people when they were watching it live, and that is Armando Resendiz there against Caleb Plant. Now, we know what was happening there in that particular card. You had, of course, Jamal Charlo in there against Thomas Cornflake Lamana, and you had Caleb Plant going up against Armando Resendiz. Now, with that, they were trying to set up the thing there for Caleb Plant and Jamal Charlo. If they were going to be able to get the wins, then you would be able to see those two face each other later in the year. That was the plan. It was like, okay, if they're able to win those fights, then we could have had, Plant and Charlo, someone saying like in November of this year. But given what was happening with Caleb Plant early in the fight, and there with Armando Resendiz and him, continuing to kind of like overwhelm Caleb Plant and have more activity, particularly in the last parts of the fight. The decision was made, and they had Armando Resendiz as the winner, and right now is the interim champion there at 168 pounds with the WBA. All right. So that is another one of those candidates there for upset of the year. Let's see here. What else we got? Here is another candidate. Rene Alvarado versus Victor Morales. This was in Anaheim, California in June. You did have Victor Morales there that was going into this bout at 20-0-1, right? Going up there in the rankings in the super featherweight division, but now going up against Rene Alvarado. Of course, Alvarado had been in the mix a good amount of times and within the 130 and 135 pound divisions. Now he had like a string of losses, at the time, man. Like it was like goodness gracious, like he was coming off of two consecutive losses, right? Three of the last four fights. Of course, like he's had losses to William Zepeda, Lamont Rose Jr., Roger Gutierrez, a multitude of others, Yuri Orkis Gamboa. You could name it, Jojo Diaz. Like you could go through down the line, right? So, but you've seen there, like he had what 16 losses up to that point of facing Victor Morales. But he was able to outbox and outpoint Victor Morales to a unanimous decision win. So that one is another one of those strong candidates for upset of the year. So that's what you got. You got Jorge Garcia versus Charles Conwell. You got Rolly Romero versus Ryan Garcia. You got Armando Resendiz versus Caleb Plant. And you got Rene Alvarado versus Victor Morales. All right. So there you go. All right. I'm gonna just run through this here real quick, man. So this is what I'm gonna do. I'm going to run this real quick, right? uh, I will just put up the category, right? The category that we have coming up, and then I'll just name what we have within that particular category. Okay, so that's how I'm going to do it here from this point, and get this going. But if you're able to check this out here live, big ups for all those that's listening to the Midweek Report live. And if you pretty much like a new visitor here, hit the like button. If you're on Rumble, you could hit the I guess the heart button, or say that you could pitch in and subscribe and that type of stuff. There, we appreciate it here at the Boxing Source. All right, we got the next category here, real quick. Is going to be round of the year. So this is what we got for round of the year. All right. First one is Callum Smith versus Joshua Barazzi, round 6. That was a good fight. That was on that fight card. What we have there? The Baterbia Bivol rematch. It was on that, I think. And you had Callum Smith versus Joshua Barazzi as part of that fight card. Round 6, pretty much was a good one. Good scrap between those two on that front. All right. Next candidate is David Benavidez versus David Morrell, round 4. I was there in Las Vegas for that one. Um, that whole fight was really good. It was really good action through that whole fight. But round 4 was a point where you had some tense moments, because at the time David Benavidez had a cut. That was, I think, what, around the side of his eye, something like that. So I was like looking at, okay, how is David Benavidez going to respond to having that cut right there? Because you hadn't necessarily seen David Benavidez deal with that over the course of his run that he had as super middleweight champion, and then moving up to light heavyweight. Of course, he fought Alexander Kovacic, before, and whole thing with that before getting this thing here with David Morrell Jr. And we just said that we knew that it was going to be a fight, but round 4 kind of like stood out, because that was a point where David Benavidez had to deal with a few things here before going through those next series of rounds, kind of racking up the rounds until he got knocked down, and then the point got taken away from David Morrell before the end of that round, and then you had the 12th round. So that's one. All right, next one is Devontae Tank Davis versus Lamar Rhodes Jr. round 9. Hey, y'all know. I mean, y'all know what happened in round 9 between Tank Davis and Lamar Rhodes Jr. I don't really have to say much about that one. All right, and the next candidate that we have is Christian and Billy versus Lester Martinez, round 10. Good fight within the super middleweight division. That was part of the Canelo versus Crawford event at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas. Christian and Billy being the WBC interim champion. Lester Martinez, coming up in the rankings there in the super middleweight division. Two guys there were undefeated. So and it ended up being a very good scrap. Now live, live, I felt like it was still, very good, but like the crowd didn't really get into it until like round 9 or round 10. But that was a good fight overall. But round 10 kind of like stood out between those two because, yeah, it was kind of getting a little bit brutal there at that point there between Billy and Martinez. So there you go. You got, of course, Colin Smith versus Joshua Boazzi, round 6. David Benavidez versus David Morrell, round 4. Tank Davis versus Lamont Roach Jr., round 9. And Christian and Billy versus Lester Martinez at round 10. All right. So that's what we got there for round of the year. All right. So, we let's see here. Timothy Taylor asked a question here on the live chat. Will Jake Paul have to keep fighting to keep his boxing promotional company relevant? I don't think so. I don't think so. Even with Jake Paul, what was it, having two fights this year? Most valuable promotions had like a number of fights that's been happening, whether it's like in Orlando, Florida, or like I think he had some in Ohio at one point. Had one in Canada. Like I'll be able to. I have to look into my archives because they send like the blast as far as like those fights that happen, like most valuable prospects and all that type of stuff. So when you have those most valuable prospects cards that happen, um, they kind of they kind of put in all of those events that happen over the course of the year, right? And of course, and you also have the thing there, like for example, what's going on in the first week of 2026. You have the thing with Amanda Serrano, they're having her bout, right? So I would say that the whole thing with most valuable promotions with Jake Paul and Nikita Badarian, they're still going to be able to do their thing. I don't think that Jake Paul, whether he continues his career or not, I don't think that that's going to be the be all end all for most valuable promotions. At least not for 2026 or going into 2026. I don't think so. You know, yeah, he did, suffer some real damage there with that knockout, by Anthony Joshua. But like I said, I mean, I don't think that it's going to be enough to kind of like put him, if it puts him out of the commission, then they're still going to make the adjustments or whatever they need to do there in order to keep most viable promotions going. And they got a number of fighters that they do have signed that they could make some moves with, So, and we've seen them, in the fight card here last Friday, and what happened there at Madison Square Garden this summer. So, there you go. All right. Just here, real quick. Next candidate we have is I'm able to see it. Yeah, knockout of the year. We had some good candidates for knockout of the year. Some of them, I'm gonna be real with you. Some of them kind of like stand out above the rest, even with the candidates. Some of the candidates that we do have, the like, there's some that you're like, yeah, that that should be basically either number one or number two. But here is what we have here for candidates for knockout of the year. The first one is Dave Allen versus Johnny Fisher. Dave Allen was able to have Johnny Fisher like have a face plant on the mat. Okay. So he was able to have him pretty much like out before Johnny Fisher hit the canvas. So that is one of those candidates, one of the candidates that we have for knockout of the year. Next one up is, I'll just say this one: Brian Norman Jr. versus Jin Sasaki. I mean, obviously had to be a nominee. Okay, there's nothing much to say about that one. Okay, next one we have is Alexander Usyk versus Daniel Dubois. That's another one. You go back to thinking of that one, and that was like for undisputed title. Daniel Dubois was able to get the IBF belt. He had the knockout win over Anthony Joshua last year. They did have this set up to be for undisputed, as Usyk had the other three belts, and Daniel Dubois had the IBF belt. They're over in Wembley Stadium, and man, Usyk just man, he just schooled him, man. He just schooled him, bro. And then having that definitive, ending to it. Come on, man. All right. Next candidate is Fabio Wardley versus Justice Huni. Now this one is pretty good because Fabio Wardley in that fight against Huni was in some counts losing that particular fight. And then in the 10th round, whatever, he was able to score that knockout. And you see what happened, man. You see what happened. So Fabio Wardley being able to come back and get that stoppage or the knockout win over Justice Huni, now look at him. You know what I mean? So we got all that stuff that's going on with him now in the heavyweight division. And the last candidate we got is Frank Martin versus Francis Barthel. I mean, that's another one that's like, come on, y'all seen it. Come on, man. So that's why I say, like, hey, if you got you got a couple of these candidates, you're like, y'all either you've seen it live or you've seen the replay, you're like, yeah, that's definitely a knockout of the year candidate. You know what I mean? So we had a couple of those here in this instance. So I mean, so for knockout of the year, I mean, I don't know if it would be like tough or whatever it is, but you kind of look at those candidates that I named. I'm like, at least two stand out. Some would say three, but I would say two stand out in reference to those five candidates that we do have there for knockout of the year. All right, the next one here, this is going to be really quick. This is something that I had from 2024. Now we have it here for 2025, and that's failure of the year. What do I mean by that? I mean that whether it's through results inside or outside of the ring, it kind of like made them completely tumble over in the boxing landscape. All right, so we have a few candidates here, right? And it's like three, and here they are. First one is Dimitri Bivol. Now, some people would say, "What? Dimitri Bivol? Didn't he have the win in the rematch against Artur Beterbiev and hand Beterbiev his first loss and become the undisputed champion at light heavyweight?" Yeah, but then after that, even though they say that they were going to have a rematch, first he has the WBC belt stripped from him because WBC ordered him to defend it against David Benavidez. But not only do you have that, you don't have the bout against Artur Beterbiev, the third bout. It's supposed to be a trilogy this year because you apparently have a back injury. And we didn't know that you had the back injury until months after the fight that you had with Beterbiev. And now that you're pretty much like on your way back, some people are doubting that you're going to have that third fight with Beterbiev once you return. Yeah, that's not a good look. Not a good look. All right, next candidate for failure of the year, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Come on, man. Not only that you had the fight with Jake Paul earlier this year, and you lose by decision. That ain't even really the thing. It's that days later, not even in a week, not even in a week's time, you get arrested and sent to Mexico because of your involvement with the Sinaloa cartel. Come on, man. Nah, yo, that was probably one of the craziest stories of the year when you had Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. days after having a fight with Jake Paul, you get arrested and sent to Mexico because of your potential involvement with a cartel in Mexico. Come on, man. Gotta be kidding me. Gotta be kidding me. All right, so that's another candidate for failure of the year. Third candidate to me, of course, this is from recent things that's happened this month. Janabek Alhamala. Come on, man. Come on, Janabek. You mean to tell me you got two to four major titles? Okay, you were seeing if you were going to be able to secure a fight with Carlos Adames, who had the WBC belt. Couldn't really secure that, but then you're able to get a bout with the WBA champion in Arislandi Lara, who hadn't fought since his bout against Danny Garcia. So you would have had a fight against the oldest champion pretty much in boxing right now in Arislandi Lara. And days before the fight's supposed to be taking place, you get tested positive for a performance enhancement thing. Come on, man. You end up getting scrapped completely from that bout against Arislandi Lara, and Arislandi Lara ends up fighting Johan Gonzalez on that card on December 6th. We could have had a unification, actual like valid unification bout in the middleweight division that we hadn't had in years with Arislandi Lara and Janabek Alamhala, and Janabek ends up messing it all up. Come on, man. That's why he got it. That is why he is there under the nomination of failure of the year. So you have Janabek Alamhala, Dimitri Bivol, and Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. as the candidates or the nominees there for failure of the year. That's going to be an interesting one. That is going to be an interesting one, to say the least. All right. So you got that. We got a few more here. We got event of the year, right? So we got event of the year. Candidates for event of the year are Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn 1. Yeah, you do have the rematch, and there's one particular thing that stands out for the rematch, right? But with this main event itself and the lead into that, because remember, it was supposed to happen years before, but Conor Benn ended up, testing positive. So this is where you had the whole thing with the press conference and Chris Eubank showing up and saying, what did the five fingers say to the face? But he had an egg with him, slap. You know what I'm saying? So he slapped him with an egg. That and the build up to that particular fight and the rivalry with that is why that is a serious candidate here for this being event of the year. Okay. Next one is Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Crawford. One undisputed super middleweight championship. Fight that could have defined who would be the fighter or kind of like a strong candidate for fighter of the era. Pretty much like the two top guys within the modern era there that been able to do their thing, being multi-division world champions or multi-division undisputed champions, and then with culminating with Terrence Crawford winning the super middleweight championship. You have that. The fight that I mentioned before there with Christian Billy and Lester Martinez being part of it, and just having that whole build up and the whole scene there at Allegiant Stadium for this event. So you do have that. Okay. Next candidate is David Benavidez versus David Morrell Jr. There that was at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas in February 1st. Not just the main event, but you also had Isaac Cruz versus Angel Fierro on that. You did have the rematch between Stephen Fulton and Brandon Figueroa on that. But yeah, that main event and that Isaac Cruz versus Isaac Fierro, yeah, man, that's why that's strong candidate for event of the year. You also do have Tate Davis versus Lamont Roach Jr. March 1st at Barclays Center for event of the year. I talked about it there for, the round of the year. You had, of course, what was going on with the co-featured bouts. You did have, Gary Antoine Russell getting the win for the WBA super lightweight title. You did have the WBC super lightweight title on the line there, with Sandro Martin, ended up falling short there from getting it from Alberto Puello. You did have, what was it? Eunice Tejas versus J. Rock Williams on that card too. But the main event, the build up, the anticipation, what actually happened. Come on. And the last candidate is David Benavidez versus Anthony Yarde. That was for Ring 4, pretty much Ring 4. Yeah, you did have what happened in the main event. You did have what happened there with Ben Rodriguez, but this also had the fight between Abdullah Mason and Sam Noakes on it. So there you go. All right. So those are the candidates there for event of the year. All right. There are a number of candidates there for event of the year, but hey, I'll say this, man. Like there's a couple of them. There's a couple of them that stand out. That if they end up getting it, it would be no surprise. But I think it's pretty much like I'd say about two events that kind of like stand out, and that would kind of like be the candidate or the ones that would win therefore event of the year. Next up, real quick. All right, we got comeback fighter of the year. Now this one, unless if there's going to be a late entry or, as they say, a write-in candidate, there it really isn't. But a couple of people, a couple of candidates for this, and they would kind of like be obvious in a sense. Okay, one of them is Emmanuel Dapidran Pacquiao. Yep, Manny Pacquiao is their candidate for comeback fighter of the year. Having a one fight, yes, he did have the one fight against Mario Barrios, where he was this close to becoming the WBC welterweight champion of the world at his age. Very close. And if it wasn't for those last few rounds there from Mario Barrios, Manny Pacquiao would have been, the he would have been the WBC welterweight champion. That would have been crazy. All right. There's only one other candidate at least here right now, and that's another fighter that is now in the welterweight division. Was able to score a win in the welterweight division. Was able to become a world champion in the welterweight division, and that is Devin Miles Haney. Was able to score early knockdown over Brian Norman Jr., was able to, outpoint him over the course of 12 rounds, score a decision, unanimous decision victory, and become the WBO welterweight champion of the world. And for those that, kind of like checked out last year's Boxing Source Awards, Devin Haney was the 2024 failure of the year. So you go from that to being a candidate here for comeback fighter of the year, Devin Miles Haney. All right. Now here's another one where we pretty much only had like a couple of candidates, just be out there because at least to me, I don't think there was like a few that stood out in comparison to last year, I would say. So I'm gonna put it like this. All right, women's fight of the year. Women's fight of the year. Okay. At least to me, there's only like two, and one of them is like and they basically come from the same event. Now, there might be another candidate. Like I said, there might be late entries here, but these are the two that stand out. I will say that there might be another entry on this thing, but I have to, pull it up because there was like one fight that was on Pro Box. I'm gonna see if I could actually pull it up. To be honest with you, let me see if I could do that. All right, because I remember this one, right? And that it was a good scrap, and it was on Pro Box there, and they had it to the point where I feel like it was something where you had the winner ended up taking the belt from an undefeated fighter. Okay, here it is, right? All right, I'll give you the two that I had off rip, and then the one that was on Pro Box. Okay, and here we go. All right, first one, of course, is from an event, main event, and everything like that. Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano 3. Course, with all that was on the line with that, with the two fights that they had before, especially with the second fight that happened in AT&T Stadium last year. This one, highly anticipated, was of course part of the main event of an all women's card there at Madison Square Garden. So that was like biggest event for like women's boxing at the time. There for that, and this being the main event there. So you did have that as one of the candidates or nominees here for Women's Fight of the Year. Another candidate for Women's Fight of the Year happened on the same card, and it was for a unified championship in the super middleweight division, and that is Savannah Marshall versus Shadeja Green. Now that one there you had, of course, the thing with Deja Green, um, of course, coming back from one loss that she had earlier in her career, there, against French on Cruz's arm, was able to get her way back up and win a world title. Was on that fight card at the AT&T Stadium and defended the world title there on that, and then moved from that point, having this fight against Savannah Marshall. And those first few rounds, it looked like Savannah Marshall was kind of like racking up the rounds, and then Shadeja Green came back, started to change her style up, and then that style ended up having her win by decision to become the unified champion there at super middleweight. Okay, so that's another candidate. The other one that I said would be a late entry is this one: Nazarena Romero versus Mayeli Flores. That was on Pro Box TV on May 10th. It was part of the joint there that they had in Kissimmee, Florida. Of course, headlined by Erickson Lubin versus Ardrell Holmes Jr. But this fight between Romero and Flores, that was a really good scrap between those two. Okay, and the thing with Marielle Flores, I think Flores was you know big underdog for this, just a big underdog for this. She was there at, I don't know if it was like 33 at the time, but she did like kind of be there as one of those fighters that maybe people didn't think that was going to win it, but going up against Nazarena Romero over the course of, I would say, like six of those 10 rounds that they had was like a whole lot of action. So you go to that one. That's the one I was saying like, hey, I'll remember that one because that was a good scrap between the two, and Flores ended up winning by a split decision there. And I think the WBA Super Bantamweight Championship was on the line for that, if I'm not mistaken. But you go to that fight. If you haven't checked that fight out, that would be the one to kind of like say, okay, that might be a late entry for women's fight of the year. So that's why I had to add that, because that one kind of like stood out to me on that front. Therefore, women's fight of the year. So you have those three candidates there for women's fight of the year. Now, of course, you just follow that up there with women's fight of the year to, of course, what you would have as women's fighter of the year, right? So got a number of candidates there for women's fighter of the year, right? You got Gabriela Fondor, of course, undisputed there in her weight class. You got Katie Taylor, of course, had the win over Amanda Serrano. You have Alicia Baumgartner, had a couple of wins here this year. One recent here this past week. You have Clarissa Shields, of course, there, with being as now the undisputed heavyweight champion now with Clarissa Shields, and you have Caroline Dubois. Okay, so you have those 5 candidates there for Women's Fighter of the Year. It's going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot. We gonna see, because last year it was Gabriela Fandora. Okay, now this year, is she going to be able to repeat as Fighter of the Year? But we'll see. She have a very good year, but we're gonna see if she's going to repeat as Women's Fight of the Year. That's what we got there real quick there for a Women's Fighter of the Year, right? So that's the thing that we have for that, and so of course we have uh, just a couple of categories left. You have Men's Fight of the Year, right? And you have Men's Fighter of the Year. For Men's Fight of the Year, we got these 5 candidates. Okay, you got Naoya Inoue versus Ramon Cardenas. That was in May over in Las Vegas there at the T-Mobile Arena. Ramon Cardenas, of course, was there as a significant underdog, but early in that fight, he was able to properly time Naoya Inoue and be able to score a power punch that knocked down Naoya Inoue and had, the folks there at T-Mobile Arena like in shock. But Naoya Inoue was able to, respond to that and be able to score knockdowns of his own, and then eventually end up having to stop his victory over Ramon Cardenas in a really, really good action fight there in May. Okay. Next one is a fight that, well, one of the fights that we mentioned earlier this year, earlier here, and that is Lester Martinez versus Christian and Billy. They're in the super middleweight division. That was in September at Allegiant Stadium. There are 2 undefeated fighters there at super middleweight. Yeah, you did have the undisputed super middleweight championship happening as the main event for that, but these were the 2 guys that kind of like were around that top part of the super middleweight division. You did have Christian and Billy as a WBC interim champion going into that bout against Lester Martinez. Lester Martinez, has had a couple of good performances, before his bout against Christian and Billy. I did see him here last year, right, at what they call the Care First Arena, where he was able to defeat Carlos Gongora, right? So you had that. Then you had his fight against Joshawn James. Of course, that particular bout had been delayed a couple of times. When they finally had it, he was able to defeat Joshawn James by stoppage victory there. And then here against Christian and Billy, that was just a good scrap that ended up in a split draw. Now, me being there live, I did feel like Lester Martinez got the win, but ended up being a draw. And now you're not having a rematch. Christian and Billy's been ordered to, fight. Where is it? He's ordered to fight. Um, yeah, I'm drawing a hold up, drawing a quick blank here, but you got your guy there in geez, they don't even have him up here. Hamza Shiraz. So they have him ordered to go up against Hamza Shiraz for that WBC belt. Would be for the WBC full title, actually, because you do have Terrence Crawford that did announce his retirement. So you do have that WBC belt vacant, even though before his retirement, he didn't pay the fee for the WBC. So you have a vacant WBC belt there at super middleweight. But yeah, you do have, like I said, Christian and Billy there versus Lester Martinez. That was in September. That was a good scrap between those 2. All right. So that's one of the candidates there for Men's Fight of the Year. You also have David Benavidez versus David Morrell Jr. as a candidate for Men's Fight of the Year. That one, I'm kind of I'm kind of biased with that one, but like I said, it was a good bout that they had there on that front. Like I said, in reference to a candidate for round of the year, round 4, you had the thing there where David Benavidez, had suffered a cut, during the early part of that fight, and we had to see how he was going to respond. He did respond very well. He did show good elements of offense and defense. there for a majority of those rounds going into like round 10. And then round 10 happened. You seen David Morrell Jr. kind of like switch things up a little bit, try to be more of the aggressor and try to fight off his front foot and try to walk down David Benavidez. And as a result, there in round 11, he was able to score a knockdown. But at the end of the 11th round, they kind of scrapped it up a little bit, and Morrell hit him, Benavidez after the bell, and referee ended up taking a point. So the point that he gained from the knockdown, he ended up losing from the thing that happened after the bell. But that particular fight, man, yeah, I was really happy about that one. The next one here is from March 13th of this year. You had Kenshiro Terashi versus Seigo Akui. They're in Japan for the WBC Flyweight Championship. And that one was like almost like you could say that was almost a version of a David Benavidez versus David Morrell Jr. when it comes to action. And it was very close going into the last round. And Kenshiro Terashi was able to, come up with the flurry to overwhelm Seigo Akui and get a stoppage victory there in that one. Now, according to the scorecards, if Akui was able to get through that 12th round, and if he was able to get a win in that 12th round, he would have won the bout by a split decision. Because he was up on the cards. He was up on two of the cards going into that last round. But Terashi was able to come back and score a technical knockout victory there in the 12th round. Okay. So that's another candidate. Last candidate on here is another one of those fights where I'm kind of biased because it was there live. Isaac Cruz versus Angel Fierro. Yes, that was on February 1st as well as David Benavidez versus David Morrell Jr. But this particular bout, listen, the lead up to the fight, they was going at it. They had some good face offs, in the workout during fight week. They was talking, before the bout, even though there was a lot of stuff that was, talked about between Benavidez and Morrell. But this fight right here, man, listen. Isaac Cruz, of course, fan favorite. Angel Fierro just coming in there. Of course, may not be as well known by far from Isaac Cruz, but still, like, come on. And those two, like, went at it for a majority of those rounds, man. And you just saw a few elements there from Isaac Cruz that we didn't necessarily see from him up to that point. Now, he did go back to the Isaac Cruz that people knew about in this fight against Lamar Rose. But that's a whole nother story. In this fight against Angel Fierro, he looked like he was one of those fighters that you be saying like, okay, he kind of made that next step from having the style that he's usually known for to kind of like be able to adapt to what his opponent is doing. And those two just went at it back and forth for 12 rounds. Okay. So those are the 5 candidates there for men's fight of the year. That one, like I said, for that, you do have a number of things there as far as like potential candidates, but man, hey, I might end up being biased in that one too. Might end up being biased in that one too, man. All right. So, with that being said, you have the last one here, of course, men's fighter of the year. There, so you got a number of candidates there for men's fighter of the year, and we got to see how this is gonna turn out. We got 4 candidates there, and it's pretty much like for the 4 fighters that are around the top of the boxing source pound for pound ranking. So it's like, come on. You got Alexander Usyk, of course, has been the undisputed champion until recently, giving up the WBO heavyweight championship. You got Jesse Bam Rodriguez, of course, there that's trying to be on his way to becoming undisputed in his current weight class that you have there at super flyweight, right? You have Terrence Crawford that scored the win over Canelo Alvarez to become the undisputed super middleweight champion until he felt like he didn't want to pay the WBC an additional $100,000. but he still got the win over, Canelo Alvarez though. So that's still a fact. And you have Naoya Inoue, who will have his upcoming bout against David Allen Picasso over in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia on the 27th. So those are the four candidates there for Men's Fighter of the Year. Okay. So that is your whole thing for the Boxing Source Awards. The people that are nominated, or fights or events are nominated for each of those candidates. And we will have that award show that will take place on Sunday evening there at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. So y'all tune in here, whether it's through a Rumble or YouTube, we'll be able to have the Boxing Source 2025 award show. All right. Y'all see the candidates. I may end up posting the candidates for each of these categories on social media leading into the Boston Source Award show. So y'all be able to, check it out if you missed it, live or whatever it is, and try to go through the replay and all that type of stuff. But with that being said, that is what I got here in this one. Y'all enjoy the holiday season. Y'all celebrate Christmas, all that type of stuff. Hey, be sure to spend time with your family and friends, all that type of stuff. And like I said, I'll be back on Sunday with the Boxing Source Award show, not the Source Awards, the Boxing Source Award. All right. So that's what I got for y'all. Until next time, I will catch y'all later. Peace out.